Pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for joining us this evening. This is the City of Fredericksburg Planning Commission, and the first order of business is approval of the minutes.
I move approval of the minutes of the November 14th, 2018 meeting.
Second?
I have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Quick comment. As written, they have me as not participating. I was not a member. I was not a sworn member when that meeting took place. So I should not be included in the counts.
Okay, so we do have a modification.
I'd accept that amendment to the eliminating Mr. Durham's name from the member list.
Mr. Gant, I believe that we received substantial modifications about the minutes from Mr. Pates on this item. Is that correct, Campbell?
Let's just give them a minute.
Okay. We have not had a chance to process those. We probably should have a conversation and understanding of how to handle the minutes moving forward. We're somewhere in between verbatim and not verbatim minutes, and we're trying very hard to keep processing that, but it's a lot of man hours to do that, and I'm not sure that it's completely representative of the meeting. So maybe at the end of the meeting, we can also have a conversation about how to tackle minutes here in the future.
Okay, so how about this? How about we table the minutes for right now and go ahead and move forward?
I'll withdraw my motion to later.
Okay? And we'll talk about this at the end of the session. Okay? All right. Moving forward, item number 4, any declaration of conflict of interest? Hearing none. So we have 2 items on. Okay, Mr. Pace, you good? Mr. Hornick explained to you about the minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I just want to be sure. I'm sorry about that. Okay. We have 2 items for public hearing this evening. So we'll start with item 5A, SE 2018-02, 1 Hanover, Thomas Mitchell. Staff?
All right, good evening. We have a special exception request for density for a project known as 1 Hanover. Currently it's a mixed-use development, has 18 residential units currently planned, as well as commercial and residential space with some parking on the ground floor, and they are asking for an additional 6 units for a total of 24 residential units. Staff's analysis focused primarily on the effect those 6 units would have. Part of the problem that they have here is, or part of the issue that we have is there's 92 parking spaces are required for this project based on all of the uses. They have 46 provided, 39 will be provided via the parking garage, and additional 7 will be provided on Hanover Street. The other half will be paid for in our fee in lieu of program. So at $6,500 a space, that comes out to a total payment of $300,000 for half of their parking costs. One thing they'll be doing as part of this project, there's an alley on the site. It's 14 feet wide. They'll be widening that to 20 feet. They will also be paving it. It's currently, I believe, dirt or some gravel. Applicant needs to describe how they will be using the alley space for loading and unloading of supplies for their restaurant and for the commercial space. And there's also a trash enclosure at the rear of the alley. We'll talk about that later. A phase 1 archaeology study is required as part of this permit. It's one of our conditions. And furthermore, as a mixed-use structure with residential spaces on it, staff has looked at conditions for pedestrian safety and accessibility, such as requiring widened sidewalks, street trees, colonial era lighting that fits in with our historic downtown, as well as mirrors at the entrance and exit of the garage for safety of both drivers and pedestrians. This is a view of the sites at the corner of Hanover and Sophia Streets. A view of the structure, there's 2 levels of residential units, one of commercial and restaurant space, and then below that is parking at ground level. This is a view of the unit layout, and it's 12 units here. And it's a mixture of efficiency units, studios, one-bedrooms, and two-bedroom apartments. Street improvements include more trees along Hanover, street trees along Sophia, and then we have our widened alleyway here in the back, which is for public. It'll be an easement, and they will have a trash enclosure at the rear of the alleyway, which is 1 foot away from the property line. And our requirements and our ordinance are that it be 3 feet from the property line. Staff believes that due to its location out of the way of where most traffic is going to be and where most people are going to be walking at the end of an alleyway, it's a suitable location for a trash enclosure, and that this can be dealt with through our site plan exception process. On August 27th, City Council approved special exceptions in regards to the number of units, the height of the building, and the amount of space that can be used for non-residential ground floor. They also approved a special use permit for building the structure in the floodplain. Once our current ordinance was adopted, most of these became moot points. They were incorporated into the ordinance that we have now. And furthermore, the Architectural Review Board has approved the proposal that's before you all tonight. So staff has tried to get a focus on our conditions for pedestrian safety and accessibility, again with that widened sidewalk, the street trees, pedestrian scale lighting, and mirrors at that garage entrance and exit. They do have a way to deal with their parking, half provided on site and via Hanover Street, and the other half they will pay for with our city's fee in lieu of policy. For trash and loading, neither of their proposed improvements meet our development standards. Their loading space, again, needs to be at least 3 feet away from our property line, and it's only 1 foot. And they need to have a loading space for their restaurant commercial uses based on the square footage of those uses, and no loading space has been provided. And we had a citizen who came to us the other day and mentioned those as points, and I believe he's here this evening. We'll talk about those. And finally, the alley currently has substandard surfacing, and there's drainage issues. When it rains, water pools up and floods some of the backyards of the other buildings that face under that alleyway. Staff believes that we should condition that drainage improvements being done to this alley as part of approval. Those 6 new units, there'll be a total of 24 units on this site. And there's a average median income for the Washington Metropolitan Statistical Area, of which Fredericksburg is a part. And we have our various numbers up here for how much each person makes at half of that median income. $41,000 for one person. For family of 2, it's $46,900. For family of 3, it's $52,000. It's half of the average minimum income. And a rent based on 30% affordability for those persons making 50% of the average minimum income would be an efficiency unit at $1,000 a month, approximately. One-bedroom unit at just under $1,100 a month. A two-bedroom at just over $1,300 a month. And that would help fulfill our city's comprehensive plan goals for affordable housing. If we're able to get some affordable units in here, Planning Commission may want to consider having a 1 studio room, a 1-bedroom, and then possibly 2 two-bedroom rooms, conditioned to be affordable housing as part of the plan. There are currently 5 conditions that we have here. First, that the uses and infrastructure should be substantially in accordance with the plan that's before you all. The architectural features, mass, scale, if they're modified, are subject to ARB approval and review. The alley easement must be widened from 14 feet to 20 feet. And staff, we made an error. We meant to include language in there about having drainage improvements. We did not include that language. We'd like to ask that the Planning Commission consider adding language that drainage improvements be made to this alleyway. Furthermore, phase 1 archaeology investigation is required before they can start any disturbance at the site. The alternative parking plan is required to accommodate the 46 spaces that they will need to pay for, and that they have the improved streetscape, pedestrian amenities, and mirrors at the parking entrance exit to ensure safety. So our applicant is here tonight, staff and the applicant here to answer any questions that you may have.
All right, commissioners, Mr. Peets.
Oh, let somebody else go first.
Okay.
So this project is, ground floor is parking.
Yes, sir.
Second floor is retail?
Commercial, retail, and restaurant space as well.
Okay. And the third floor are the apartments?
Yes, sir.
Is that accurate? With 24 units on the third floor?
Third and fourth.
Third and fourth, okay, thank you. All right. Great. All right. On the architectural, I'm sorry, on the archaeological investigation, so I imagine that's drilling test drills, right? And seeing if there's anything there?
I believe so.
Some series of them per standard, right? So let's say nothing is uncovered in that archaeological study, but then ground is broken, and they start digging. Are there any, does the city have a process by which the city staff oversees the excavation so that in case there is some archaeological find during excavation, work can be stopped, evaluated, et cetera?
That's a good question, Mr. Durham. We've got a lengthy condition in the recommendation, it's number 3. So prior to site plan approval, owner shall perform the Phase 1 archaeological study, which you described. I think it's you dig and test pits. If the historic resources planner finds, after review of the identification level archaeological field survey, that an archaeological site exists, is likely to be significant, then he or she may require the owner to submit Phase 2 and Phase 3, which is more extensive work. Let's see what else is in here. We took this condition language from our draft archaeological ordinance. Let's see. So I need to read through it real quick. Chuck, I don't know off the top of your head if we've got a.
Yeah, I'm tracking, but what I'm saying is, let's say,
Check letter D on there.
Okay.
Unexpected archaeological resources are discovered on the development site after approval of the major site plan without the imposition of appropriate mitigation measures, then the development administrator shall issue an order to cease and desist all development activity in the affected area for up to 7 days.
okay,
So that would be the mechanism.
okay, great. And the historic resources planner essentially oversees all that?
Her and the development administrator, yes.
Okay, great.
And just to clarify, an archaeological Phase 1 is primarily a research of the data of literature. There may be a limited amount of field verification of that, depending on what is found. So there is not an extensive field work only occurs at the Phase 2. Phase 3 level is the full-fledged archaeological dig that most of us sort of think of. So just to be clear about this, Phase 1 is mostly a research the literature with some field confirmation, and it only gets extensive in the field, in Phase 2 and Phase 3, but that is then triggered based on what the process comes up with.
So I guess my only concern about this is if Phase 1, the literature review, determines that there is potentially something, or at some point in this, in any of these phases, there's some archaeological significance that's found. Has any thought been given to working with the developer on a plan for what to do with with any anything that's found, and how to interpret it, and who should own it, and all of that?
The archaeological evidence that's found on the property belong to the property owner. They do not fall under any public ownership at this point. There would probably be some discussions. Most property owners find great amounts of pottery shards and other sort of what we would sort of generally describe as debris, so it'd be somewhat burdensome for them to take care of, and so they will probably come to the city and ask if the city wishes to host those artifacts. So if there is something, a complete bowl that's found, something that is truly unique or unusual, then the owner retains ownership of that, and it is not something that falls under direct public responsibility.
And I would just mention too that the owner has a history of doing that. If you've ever been to the Courtyard Marriott, when they did the original excavation for that, those artifacts are on display.
Yeah, just a
Right.
quick clarification too. A Phase 1 survey, Phase 1A is only literature, but Phase 1 also does include shovel testing at intervals. So that
There's
is,
testing. Yeah,
that
there's
is part of
expensive
it.
testing.
And my guess is that given the location of this, something's probably going to be found to trigger a Phase 2. May not be deemed significant, but most likely you're probably going to hit that threshold.
Okay, and then I appreciate that conversation, and that helps to clear things for me. The second question I have is, I guess third question, is is this considered a new project, or is this a revision to a previous project? Can you explain where we're at?
They currently have approval for the 18 units for the residents and also for the, I believe for the commercial and the parking. And Mike knows the history of this project. He's been working on it for a while, so if I'm wrong, please correct me. But this, to my knowledge and what I've written up in the staff report, is an addition to what's already been accepted. And before you tonight, we just have the 6 additional units. They want to increase the density. They said it'll make this project more economically feasible to have this increased density on site.
Great, thanks.
Mr. Rodriguez.
I just have a couple questions. For the retail and commercial portion of this building, I guess 15,000, 16,000 square feet, what are the handicap requirements for that? I don't know, maybe it's because these are rough plans, but
It's
there's
based
only
on,
one spot.
The building permit, or
Yes.
the building code, which requires 1 per 25 provided. That's the handicap requirement.
Okay, does that mean so there's only, what,
39.
39 in the actual facility, but their requirement is the 92, so does it go off the 92, or does it go off of the 39?
Required, so that
Which
would
is the
be based
92.
On the 92.
Okay, because I only saw one handicap parking spot in there. So that was just one question for clarification. And
So everyone knows, what's accompanying this document is a general development plan. It is not a site plan. There will be a follow-up, and I'm explaining this for everybody's benefit. There will be a follow-up, assuming this is approved, if this is approved, then there'll be a follow-up document of a site plan that will ensure that standards such as the handicap provisions are adhered to. This general development plan is intended to be a general representation of development on the property, and that's limits its applicability.
and then my next question is, in terms of, I know the recommendation was about the affordable housing, and I don't I have questions for the applicant, but the planning commission, there's no prohibition with us putting those type of requirements in making that recommendation for approval to council. We can do that? Okay. I just wanted to clarify that.
That's not part of our formal recommendation, but it is something for discussion because it's been a topic. that's come up.
Outstanding.
Yes, sir.
In the general policy of the city, in a general way, we do not have an ordinance or any regulatory standard that we can recommend based on, and so we have not done that, but we know that that has been an issue that has been raised in the past, and so we just wanted to provide that information for you.
So on that topic, does staff have the wherewithal to assist the developer with figuring out how to come up with or participate in the appropriate programs such that they could offer affordable housing? You know, there'd be subsidies associated with these things, or are we just saying that offer these things at a lower cost? I mean,
The latter.
The typical, there are multiple ways of handling from a regulatory standpoint, and the most direct approach that's been adopted by many communities is simply an inclusionary statement that a certain percentage of units is set aside for certain income levels, and that there have been covenants submitted with the site plan and the details to sort of show how that would work. This is not subsidized housing. This is not, there's no form of rental assistance that's being proposed. There's no public process or project or money involved in this. This is simply, what we're saying is the most direct approach that the commission wishes to pursue it is simply asking for a set-aside that would be solidified through covenants.
Mr. Horny.
Mr. Johnson, was there any requirement for affordable housing in the prior application that was approved?
No,
the
no, this
conditions.
has been an issue that's just sort of evolved over the past recent time,
Thank you.
past few years.
Mr. Page.
Yes, I have a number of questions. One of the questions I had was that, as I originally understood this project, it was discussed about building them as condominiums. Has there been any further discussion of that?
Not to my knowledge, sir. The applicant is here this evening if you'd like to ask them.
But you all haven't had any. I was just asking about discussions, not regulatory requirements. Okay. To talk about the affordable housing, it was interesting to see that it's presented here as part of the analysis, the staff analysis. And the way I understand this is, as it's being presented, is that, let's see, is that your staff memo says that based on the affordability index in the SMSA, which, as an aside, I know Fredericksburg didn't used to be in the SMSA, but it's been changed to now that we are part.
Yes, sir.
Okay. But that the applicant would be talking about setting aside one efficiency unit, one bedroom unit, and two bedroom units, and that the renters for those apartments would need to prove that they met the requirements for affordable housing according to this formula in the SMSA. And so I was kind of surprised to see that it was not part of the conditions. What is the staff's position? Do you recommend that the city include this as a condition?
This is the first time that staff's kind of brought this forward to your attention. We do not have an ordinance basis upon which to make that recommendation. So we were trying to anticipate your all's concerns and suggest a mode to go forward. We have a general policy. If the commission wants to break this new ground, then I applaud the commission's interest in doing that. We've discussed this with the city attorney. She is very uncomfortable with the idea of us making it as a requirement because we do not have particular ordinances. She does acknowledge that we have policies and that there is general state law that makes provision for this. I believe she would feel comfortable at some level of taking this forward to council. This would be a new thing for us to sort of stipulate, and we will have to have further discussions as we go forward.
So I'm right in understanding that the city has never had any kind of set-aside requirement for affordable housing on a project like this.
True.
We have received a proffer on the second phase where 10% of the units were set aside at 50% AMI, or maybe 30% AMI. I would have to go back and find those details. So there's been one proffer that has been made to that effect.
Okay. Because if this were to be made a condition, then I think that we would be setting a precedent, and probably there would be many future proposals to have this kind of set aside. From what you know about these kinds of conditions, do you think that they are beneficial? Do you think they work? Are they a problem? I mean, I've had no experience with them at all.
In other communities, they have addressed it from an entry level, sort of a beginning standpoint of dealing with their issue. There's many other ways of dealing with affordable housing. I have a little discussion about affordable housing later on the director comments that we can get more into it. But they do prove to work, and it is a little bit of a logistical issue because there would be covenants, and part of the covenants, so there would have to be some city monitoring, public monitoring to ensure over time, because the applicant's not going to own this building forever, and it will go to subsequent owners, and this runs with the property. So And that needs to be part of a larger discussion of how we deal with affordable housing. But we're smart enough to know you all, to anticipate that one of you is going to, would be bringing this up. And so we wanted to provide a vehicle, if you choose to drive it down the road, so be it.
Yeah, I'm personally a little ambivalent about it. I'm not sure that it's the best way to address the issue, nor am I sure that it's appropriate to take this project and suddenly, without any prior notice or discussion, say this is going to be part of the project. On the other hand, I suppose you have to always start somewhere. But I do feel strongly that if it's being presented here as part of the discussion, and I'm assuming that by this being in here that Mr. Mitchell is amenable to it. But I don't think it should be used to, promote the project or to have it going forward if it isn't legally enforceable. I mean, I think that we either do it or we don't do it. And so I'd be interested in knowing what the other commission members think. Another question I had was about the reduced square footage for the reduced square footage for the project is in the commercial, or is it the residential, or what? Where is that reduction?
It's gotta be in the residential, because I think there's more non-residential space. Yeah, the number that was previously advertised, it was on the previous plan, was 63,000 square feet, and this project is 45,000. So that's a substantial reduction in residential square footage.
I'm just wondering, you think that's in the residential?
I think that's it, but again, that's a.
On the heights
for the
come down a
applicant.
little. I don't know whether that had
They
anything to
did,
do.
yeah, they shrunk it down and, yes, sir.
Oh, it is entirely one less floor? Oh, I didn't quite realize that. Okay. Overall, I think this is a better project than it was originally. I think it's improved. I also wanted to talk about the parking. As I understand it, there are how many spaces per, let's see, I had that written down here somewhere. There are how many spaces, okay, here we go. They're required to have 92 spaces, and they propose an on-site parking garage for 39 spaces, plus 7 on Hanover Street. That leaves 46 spaces that will be provided by paying into the city's downtown parking fund at a rate of $6,500 per space for a total of $299,000, which I'm assuming is payable upon a building permit?
Prior to approval of the site plan.
Prior to approval of the site plan. And where do you think these extra spaces are going to come from? Anybody thought about that?
That's a good question. And the downtown parking fund does not equate a one-for-one. We're not gonna build parking spots across the street. It just goes into the parking fund, and we've used previous payments to redo the Charles Street lot, if y'all are familiar with that public lot that's between William and Amelia and Charles and Princess Anne,
Or the
I think.
bank parking?
So the city purchased that and resurfaced it and created public parking. So that type of improvement, and a thing to think about with the capital improvement discussion is it time to prioritize another parking facility? And the Walker parking study does discuss that while there's not a dearth of parking in downtown, locating parking in other areas could be advantageous because it's close to where people want to park. So that could be part of your CIP comments on directing where that money should go in the future. But there is no facility right now that we can sit here and say that 300 grand is going to go right there to that lot and provide parking.
I mean, I think it would, behoove the city as it approves these kinds of projects that require a lot of parking to have some sort of idea in mind when they approve it, how are we going to deal with it? And it also seems to me that parking needs like those generated by this project should be somewhere in close proximity to the project. I mean, that just seems logical to me. Parking in this area is a particular problem, particularly with the Riverfront Park. That has no parking. And so you're not aware of any current plans by the council to address parking in this area?
No, sir. What I did do, because I thought this would come up, and we did talk with Mr. Smith about it yesterday, was go back and reread the Walker parking study, just to double check so I could speak to you all about it. And just to put the things out on the table here, we are underutilizing our infrastructure. The weekday peak, we only get up to 66% of off-street parking occupied, and that includes the parking garage. On-street is 57%, so that's the noontime rush, which is one peak. Now, there's a desirability element, and I talked with Mr. Rodriguez about this a little bit. You know, there's a premium, especially with folks that are handicapped, and being able to park very close to where they need to be. But for all intents and purposes, what this study did was say, you've got parking. It's just a matter of whether or not people currently are willing to go park, you know, a block away or something like that. The Friday evening survey, 50% of the total public capacity is occupied. So we've got the capacity. Again, I mean, there should be a planning element about always adding to the supply. This study factored in this project, and it factored in Liberty Place. It factored in several other future developments, including the Riverfront Park. So those were all part of the study and the look at capacity.
And the parking that would be provided as part of those projects?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Mr.
Can I
Rodriguez.
just add one thing for our council's clarification, or committee's clarification? The Walker plan was done in December and February. Also, the Liberty project was the parking garage that had sub-parking. That's gone away. That plan is no longer valid. So for us to continue to cite statistics from the Walker plan, I understand that the city staff likes to do that, but I find the validity of a lot of that data now is not very good. And also on the riverfront, we're losing parking once they actually do the build out for the riverfront park. So we'll lose that. And also with the increased amount of city staff that are now utilizing the municipal parking lot per the city manager's guidance, I would expect that the utilization is a lot higher.
From personal experience, I can tell you, Mr. Rodriguez, it's not higher. On a regular basis, that parking garage is the best 60% full during the day, and a lower rate of usage in the evening. So I walk away from this project.
So if, may I ask a question on the 39 parking spaces? Are these, how many of these are going to be reserved for residents, and how many are going to be available for the retail? Has that already been proffered?
That has not been laid out. We run into this issue sometimes. You can only reserve so many for your residents because you can't reserve all your spaces for residents when it's required for your commercial use. So they haven't proposed any type of reservation. The type of uses that are proposed are off-peak, which is good. That kind of is why our parking calculation, it calculates that in. It's not so high because it's a good mix of uses that can share the same space throughout the day, if that makes any sense.
Okay, so I mean, okay, there are 24 units. You would expect that at least 24 spaces would be set aside for the residents. Is that not accurate?
So our requirement for this type of use is 0.5 parking spaces per unit. Because again, when you have the vertical mix, whoever uses it during the day, it's open at night, and that's when a resident lives there. And that's one strategy for maximizing the efficiency of a parking space. So really, they're only required 12 spaces for their residential use. So they could reserve 12, up to 12 in their lot for residential use, and then the others would just share parking with customers of the restaurant and that kind of thing. But they have not proposed that.
So I believe you were about to answer a question for Mr. Pates before Mr. Rodriguez made a statement. Is that right? You were looking up something for Mr. Pates?
I don't know, maybe you are.
Okay. For some reason I thought you were looking up something, and then Mr. Rodriguez asked a question.
I was going to ask, though, maybe we'll remember that in a minute. The spaces on Hanover Street that are allocated to this project, are they reserved for this project?
No, sir.
So, I mean, in a sense, they don't count. I mean, I don't count that. I have a much different view, I think, on downtown parking than city staff does. I think it's a serious problem, and I know it is in the perception of people in the community. I know a number of people now who have just quit coming downtown entirely because they have such difficulty parking. So part of that is perception as well as reality. But let's see, I think I had one other, but I do think that on a project like this, that I think that the city should have some plans when the council approves this, that they should have some kind of plan in mind to find these additional spaces that are needed. But that's their call, I think. I believe that's all I have for the moment for the staff.
So I just want to ask you a question though, Mr. Pates. So when folks say that you say they don't come down because of parking, is that because they can't find parking, or they want to park, let's just say, within 20 steps of where they're going, or they want to park as near as they can?
Well, it's a combination of things. I mean, on the one hand, I know people who find driving downtown treacherous because of all the obstacles and the double parked vehicles and crosswalks and everything else, that they find it difficult to maneuver. They also find it difficult to find a space on the street. They find the parking difficult. It's part of the obstacle course that you have to run when you're downtown. So, and there's no question that people are reluctant to use the parking deck because they see that as being far away and difficult. I don't know how you combat that, but I know that there is a lot of sentiment against using it.
So I just had one question. You have the church there.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been discussion about, and this will go to parking and some other things, would the church, about what happens, with all the activities and things they have going on down there? To Mr. Pate's point, it does become quite congested down there. Mm-hmm. And now you're about to add to that in that area. So has that been looked at?
Well, you're talking about 0.45 acres that's vacant now. The level of use that's proposed equal to other intersections around that area. So there will be use, and there will be people. But in terms of traffic, appreciate Mr. Durham's question. We tried to give you a lot of technical data on why the traffic impacts aren't going to rise to the level of, we didn't see a technical issue there. In terms of the parking, dispersing the parking, again, we didn't see a technical issue there either. So, and that factors in looking at the park and looking at the other uses at the intersection. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman?
Sir, Mr. Horner.
The currently approved plan, how many parking spaces were required for that, and what was the plan to address those compared to what is currently proposed?
The currently approved plan was overwhelmingly residential, and they had provided all that residential parking on site on the ground level garage. The amount of commercial was far less, and they were basically relying on the Hanover parking towards meeting that requirement. That may be a little bit of an oversimplification, but basically that was it.
Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners?
Mine's just for the
Yep, I'm about to go right there. Hearing none, at this particular time, we'll open up the public hearing. If there's anyone here to speak on this matter, primarily the applicant. Okay, you're the applicant, sir? Okay, and I would just ask that you observe the time aspects. We've got the lights there, and then, of course, just a little bit of decorum in comments and things, especially directed at staff or the commissioners, please.
Good evening. My name is Angelo Filos. I'm with Baskerville Architects. We're working with Tommy Mitchell on this project over the last few months, and I'm available to answer any questions.
All right, Mr. Okay, Mr. Hornet, go ahead.
I have a question. The change in number of units, we've got a number of 6, but are they the breakdown of 2-bedroom units to 1-bedroom? Has that changed as well, or is it simply just adding additional units from what was originally proposed? Have they gotten smaller Have you gone from 2-bedroom units to 1-bedroom units? How did you come up with more units? Was it more utilization of the same space?
I think the original 2 bedrooms were very large, and we found the mix would be more appealing in the marketplace based on, how folks are shopping today for those types of units. So we were able to get more units in a diverse mix, same percentage in 24 as 18.
Same percentage of 2s to 1s?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
But I think the big jump came when we went from just 1 and 2 bedrooms to the efficiencies and potential for studio space.
Mr. Pates?
Who do you see as your principal market for these units?
Could you please state your name and your address, please?
Tommy Mitchell. I reside at 100 Frederick Street, downtown, 22401. The question is, what market is there? Of course, I have a number of apartments downtown, and I do not have any children or families in any of the apartments, including apartments we just completed over at the General Washington Executive Center. 23 apartments, all but 6 are leased. None of the people have families, typically downtown. We cater more or less to professional folks who are commuters to DC, to some school teachers, and we have a real strong percentage of occupancy with the apartments. The commercial space, we hope to bring in some nice, diverse restaurants from either Richmond or DC. The folks, I might make a comment too, the folks that I was going to sell the piece of land to and I was going to sell the land and be a partner for perpetuity in the project. Yet after the numbers came in, and these are wonderful numbers people, Markel Group in Richmond, big developers wanted to come to Fredericksburg. In the final analysis, after everything was said and done, because we had 18 units at that time, the return on their investment did not match what their goals were. So hence, they have backed away completely. I basically, as the owner, have taken over the project, hoping to bring it to fruition. And basically the same sort of scenario as they had, with 3 nice restaurants and a nice mix of apartments, primarily efficiency in 1 bedroom downtown, which is, from my experience, has been very substantial over the years. So we have lots of professional people that live, work downtown. We also desire for many years to have a renaissance take place on Sophia Street. And I think this would be the impetus of that potentially happening. But it has to be economically feasible to do this. I have to have so many preliminary plans done before any sort of bank approval, which I don't have at this point. All the banks say, yeah, we love the project, and then, you get to the table and they don't like it. So we have to make the numbers work, obviously. So that's where my market is.
Well, what do you anticipate? Do you have some sort of range of rents that you might be looking at?
Yeah, so, I think the ones that are given to you tonight are relatively, it's a little bit lower than what we're getting now, but that's right in the market with the affordable housing.
Mm-hmm. I meant overall. I mean, are all of them anticipated to be in this range?
Well, based on the market, they will be more expensive than that, but I'm willing to
Mm-hmm.
do the 6 apartments and give a reduction. Now, I will say too, don't hamper me by making that a law, a requirement. Eventually, as Mr. Pace mentioned, I believe, that yes, I'm 69 years old, I'll be selling it at some point, or my heirs. So I would like to make sure that we can condominiumize these things in the future and not be hampered. That would have a tremendous impact.
I'm personally always in favor of trying to have condos in the city rather than apartments. Will these be constructed to make it feasible to convert?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
I see. That's
And
good.
I've asked Baskerville to make sure that that happens, and they've certainly done that thus far.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Well, it's always nice to have you with us, Mr. Mitchell.
thank you.
And I do think this is a better looking project in terms of the building and the architecture and all that than it was before. But I also wanted to ask something about the landscaping, and that is I wasn't quite able to tell from the drawings you submitted. Will there be any green space on the site at all?
I don't think so, very little.
Yeah, I know the city allows that downtown. I think it's a mistake. I wish we didn't have that, allow that. I think the courthouse really suffers from that. But if it's allowed, I suppose that you have the right to do that.
It's a nice open space across the street coming.
Yes, that's, I was just going to say.
Yeah, right. But that's all I have for Mr. Mitchell and the
Right.
applicant.
Mr. Rodriguez.
All right, sir. I have just 2 quick questions. I guess one's the easy one. Staff is recommending us to add some language in for the alleyway. Does that pose any issues to your project?
I don't think so. We factored that into the equation, so
Okay.
I don't think so.
All right,
I
and
mean,
then
it does giving up 2 feet. That's significant, but you know, the alley has to be, the fire department has to service that. And so we understand that. We made allowances for that.
okay, and then you know, I respect your comment about not hampering you, but in terms of the conversation with regarding to affordable housing, I'm sure we're going to talk about that in a minute here, in terms of maybe number wise, but you know, in concept though, is that something for you as a property owner would be amenable to?
Yeah, I've had a discussion, and I'm amenable to that. Yeah.
Okay. Great. I
Yes.
know that's something the city has been, you know, trying to have a conversation, and you know, I mentioned that at our branding meeting, is that you know, sometimes it's just asking the question first off,
Sure.
and trying to lay that groundwork. It's something that we haven't necessarily done and don't have a policy right now, but
Right. But I'm willing to do that and reserve 6 for the numbers that were mentioned
yes, sir.
before. But again, if you convert those to condominiums, I mean,
Okay.
that has to leave.
Sure.
And so, yes, I'm not only amenable, but I plan on doing that. Absolutely.
Outstanding.
So,
Thank you, sir.
yes, sir.
Appreciate that.
Mr. O'Toole.
We've talked a lot tonight about parking, and I was just curious as to what your experience is on like some of your other apartments. Would the 24 people renting these units pretty much have one car?
Yes.
And you'd expect them to kind of park in the parking area, right?
Yes, I do. Yes, I
So-
do. A lot of communities, Mr. O'Toole, don't even have parking ordinance. The market kind of dictates.
Yeah.
So you see how much money I have to spend to put into the fund.
Oh, yes.
So that's significant. Now, I hope the city, it's been discussed, will see fit to, at some point, go ahead and put another parking deck in or make the parking sufficient. But my experience has been with apartment dwellers that they don't have any problem. They would like to park right in front,
Yeah.
but when they get home
Sure.
at night after 5, very few complaints, if any, about
Okay.
the parking thing. Now, the restaurants, you know, we hope that they bring, and I know they will have to walk, you know, within a
Right.
various, you know, a radius to get to the restaurants. And I got to mention too, something I did. We do have a group that's interested in putting a office space there for one of the three. So that might be in the offing, which would be a lesser of a parking requirement should that happen. So,
Thank you.
yes, sir.
Any other questions? Sir, thank you for your time this evening.
Yes, sir. Thanks.
All right, is there anyone else present that'd like to talk to this topic? Yes, sir. Please state your name and address.
Yeah, my name is Tom Smith. I live at 1310 Kenmore Avenue, 22401. And my wife and I also own property at 723 Caroline Street, which is just across the alley from this particular project. We've owned our property for quite a number of years and have been very interested in the projects on this site, have followed concepts starting in 2004. But at this point, we love this project. We're very pleased with this project, and we hope this particular project moves forward. There were issues with some of the other projects, but this is, I think, one of the better projects that's been proposed to date. And my wife and I think the positive impacts of this project far outweigh any issues associated with the special exemption. And what do we like about this project? From an overall perspective, we're very pleased that it's consistent with the UDO, of course. It meets many of the goals of the comp plan. And very interestingly, no one has brought it up tonight. I'm surprised Mr. Hornig has not brought it up. It's very consistent with the Jump Start plan. The concepts that were identified in the Jump Start plan.
Going to talk in a minute.
Okay. I beat you to it. And Jumpstart suggested the concepts be high-density, mixed-use concepts for the Sophia Street corridor. Bingo, this is one. And the concepts in general suggested parking on the first level, a terrace overlooking the river, and retail space on that second level with residential spaces on the upper level. Again, bingo for Jumpstart. Other things we like are the great improvements to the streetscape, and that's reflected in the architectural character that this project has. It's a great fit into the floodplain, which is very difficult to integrate into the floodplain. It complements the planned riverfront park, and it will increase the number of downtown residents considerably, which the downtown residents are customers to neighboring businesses. We very much like that, having had a business there for a number of years ourselves. Getting into the more detailed features of the project, Mr. Newman has already brought up several of them. And one of the issues that we really like is the traffic flow pattern, the ingress and egress is via Sophia Street. Some projects in the past have proposed entering through the alley, so there will be no ingress and egress of that parking area in the alley, which is very good. Trash collection's been brought up. We like the fact that the trash collection in the enclosure will be way down at the very end of the alley. We like the fact that the alley is going to be paved, that drainage improvements will be incorporated. There's a lot to like about the project. We could go on, but as the project hopefully moves forward to the next phases, we have some thoughts about the next phases. We're assuming it's going to be approved. And the next phase, it gets back again to the alley and the improvements. It's long needed to be improved. I know paving and drainage has been mentioned in the staff package, but paving and drainage were not included in the draft resolution to council. We would recommend that paving and drainage be in that final resolution to city council. And we look forward to more details in the site plan. As far as trash, I've added recycling to that. There will be this trash enclosure that we're pleased with. But we just raised the question about the size of it. Is it adequate for 24 residential units, 3 restaurants plus retail space? And my discussion with staff, they're saying it may just require frequent removal. It may be sufficient size, but we may see trash trucks there very often. But we did raise one other question. With 3 restaurants there, will the restaurants require waste kitchen grease containers, which most restaurants do? Where did those grease containers go? Hopefully not in the alley, but in this enclosed space. Other future planning issues, parking. You guys have discussed parking quite a bit. We are counting on One Hanover being a great success. We are also counting on the Riverfront Park being a great success. And in our opinion, we count cars. We walk around downtown a lot. The One Hanover parking shortfall pales in comparison to the spaces that are going to be displaced by the Riverfront Park. So we don't feel this parking issue is purely a burden of One Hanover, but the city is creating a parking issue in that very neighborhood, which leads to the question you guys have already discussed, is what happens with that downtown parking fund? How will it be invested? What are the investment strategies? And if the usual answer I get is everybody needs to park in the garage, but we need to figure out how to get people in the garage. They just, for some reason, don't want to park there. But still need to know what's going to happen with that parking fund. In summary, it's a very good project for the city. It's a very good project for our neighborhood. We applaud the Jump Start likeness. We encourage similar concepts for further revitalization of Sophia Street, and we thus encourage you to approve the special exemption. And I have for Mr. Hornig, straight out of the Jump Start report, some comparisons of the concept.
Can you sign it for me?
Yeah. And if you allow me 2 more seconds, the parking issue, my wife and I were down Saturday, not a beautiful day, nasty weather, and I just looked at the area of the Riverfront Park where there will be no parking in the future. There were 72 cars parked in the mud Saturday on a lousy day. Think of what happens on a good day. So 72 spaces. There was room for more. People were parking in the mud. They were parking anywhere they can find. But they wouldn't park in the garage. But if those 72 cars were in the garage, how full would the garage have been? So I think the problem is compounding, and it's not for One Hanover to figure out how to deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The gentleman had some concerns. Is there anything that the applicant would like to respond to, or we're okay? Because he did voice some concerns, so I just wanted to put that out there. Anybody else to speak to this topic this evening? Hearing none, that closes the public hearing at this time. All right, commissioners.
I was just gonna say, I'm prepared to make a motion to have a discussion about part of it.
Okay.
Motion to have a discussion.
Well, I mean, I have a
Make motion,
proposal.
and then we'll get to discussion.
Right. So I'd like to make a motion to approve this with the recommendations from staff to include the alley, hopefully I get the right language, the paving and drainage issue. And I would like to add the recommendation of the affordable units, but doing the 1 efficiency unit, 1 bedroom, and the 2 2-bedroom. I think he's mentioned 6, but there's only 4 units that in that request. But I'd like to, with I guess, and again, I don't know the legal wording, but something to the effect of as long as it's intended, as long as the use is for rental purposes, which would allow the owner that if he sold the property and they redeveloped it, they wouldn't be held to that, because it would change the use. So I don't know the correct legal wording, but that would be my recommendation for this motion.
I'd second.
All right, I have a motion, I have a second. Discussion?
Since Mr. Smith brought this up, I certainly want to make a few comments. I did serve on the EDA for 8 years. I was the chairman for 3, and one of our priority goals is following up on the work that Mr. Smith did and others did on the Jump Start plan, which predated my time on the EDA. One of our big initiatives is to try to find a way to have the city sort of face the river. For years, it's always sort of been Caroline and Princess Anne, and Sophia had been neglected. And the whole idea of the Riverfront Park was to encourage development on the, help me out here, is that the south side, the west side of Sophia Street. This is the type of project that we envisioned in that, and the goal was to try to find uses that would locate there that would bring daytime and nighttime population versus what we have today. So to me, this revision, the residents are important, because where the residents are, you're going to have help it become more of a living city in the evenings and in the mornings, which that part of the city right now is not. I envision if this portion of the city can grow from a residential and, I'm sorry, from a restaurant and retail standpoint, we might see more evening traffic like we do on William Street sort of grow in that area, which I hope will happen, because that part of the city does get kind of dark at night. So that's why I'm supportive of this. I think it's a reasonable modification to a plan for economic purposes, and I hope you all will support it as well.
Mr. Durham?
I have a question for staff. The expanded sidewalks that you're requiring here, is that sufficient for the installation of some sort of historical interpretation of the site? So there's been discussion about the desire to develop Sophia, and there's at least one example on Sophia of a property that was redeveloped, and the property owner installed his own historical interpretation of the site, and I frankly think it's a great addition to the street. And I believe that the city, frankly, in the capital improvement plan, probably, ought to be looking at investing in additional historical interpretation along Sophia to better, so that the public better understands the significance of Sophia Street, Water Street, and its importance through the history of the city. So anyway, just from a practical standpoint, does the sidewalk that's proposed, would it support some sort of historical interpretation?
The Sophia sidewalk is a little on the narrow side. There is going to be street trees, and it can be placed, something can be placed between the street trees, but I think maybe more to the point is on the Riverfront Park side of Sophia, that there are going to be historical markers placed there, and there is going to be more room, and that's considered to be part of that design. So
Yeah,
something that addresses it's probably more likely to be on the, now the Hanover sidewalk is a little wider, and so there might be some more opportunities there. I think we can take the observation to heart and pursue that more, but I'm 99% certain that there are going to be markers on the Riverfront Park side of Sophia that will address that.
I would suggest that going forward that staff start working with developers to incorporate such improvements to these projects. I think that would be a help to make them, it would increase the viability of the street if there was some interpretation of the street's importance, and would help traffic to come down that street, and frankly, it would bring people to the businesses as a result. So just something for the staff to consider going forward.
Mr. Bates?
I wanted to ask Mr. Rodriguez about his motion about on the affordable housing. Is your motion that so long as these the project was a rental as opposed to a condominium project, that the property owner would set aside, is it 4 or 6 units?
I proposed 4.
4.
I mean, this is a starting process.
Let's see 4 in here.
Okay, that was my question. I just wanted to make sure of that.
Yes, sir. Because, I mean, he did mention that maybe in the future that might be in a different change, but, you know, we've got to start somewhere. I understand we don't have any formal documentation yet. I know that there's committees and RFIs out there trying to do something, and I think this is a lean forward that I think is supportive of the larger community here in Fredericksburg.
As I said earlier, I have some mixed feelings about it. I don't think this is the way to go about planning for and providing affordable housing. We tend to do things on an ad hoc basis, and here's another one. But given that, I think that, and Mr. Mitchell's indication that he's planning to do this anyway, I'm comfortable with the project. As I said earlier, I think this is a greatly improved project. I think it is the sort of development that is good downtown. It's exactly what has been in the historic downtown area for 150 years. It's just bigger. I'm glad that the height has been reduced. I would be opposed to anything over 50 feet. And I think it's notable that people like Tom Smith are here in support of the project. So I'm all for it.
Yes, Mr. Durham.
So with respect to the affordable housing, I applaud the developer for being amenable to this public goal. And it appears to me that since this particular arrangement is this is not subsidized housing in any respect. This is essentially workforce housing, and this is absolutely something that the city has been is having a little bit of an issue trying to get their arms around. I think staff has given us some language from the ordinance that essentially permits us to consider the degree to which a project affects the stock of affordable housing. So I think we have a legal standing. We have legal standing to do this, and the city attorney has, while has expressed some concern, has not indicated that it is necessarily a problem. So I applaud the developer for being willing to go this route. I would expect that as he noted, that the rates that are noted here in the staff analysis are only slightly below what's probably considered what they think market is. I'm thinking they'll be able to make it up somehow. So I think it'll work out.
All right. We have a motion. We have a second. If there's no more discussion, please cast your ballots.
Who's trying to vote for me?
All right. Motion passes 6-0. All right. Moving on to item number 5B. SUP 2018-04, Northern Neck Gourmet Incorporated, DBA Cork and Table. Staff.
Pardon me, this is a special use permit for alcohol sales. In CT zoning, which is where this property at 1409 Princess Anne is located, a special use permit is required if you wish to have alcohol sales under an ABC license. The applicant, Cork and Table, wants to use this spot as a restaurant, which is allowed by right, and they're not proposing any changes. I mean, everything on this site, the use for the restaurants allowed by right. There's no changes to parking. The hours are limited for the neighborhood. In this case, most of their alcohol sales would end by 11 p.m. On weekends. And staff uses this as something that should be approved. It's suitable as a transitional use between our downtown and a more residential part of the city. You can see the property here. Red Dragon is located on the north side of that block face at 1419 Princess Anne. The property itself is outlined in red. It's right next to a Creative Color and would be sharing parking with Creative Color. We have here the hours that the applicant has requested and then the hours that staff has recommended. We've increased those hours so that they can be used before noon. That way he can have alcohol sales at lunchtime and then for the dinner crowd as well. And you compared these to what exists for the brewery at Red Dragon, and the Red Dragon closes for alcohol sales at 10 p.m. On Mondays through Thursdays, and the proposal that we have here would close alcohol sales at 10 p.m. Monday through Thursday, so it's comparable to Red Dragon. In fact, on Fridays and Saturdays, it even closes an hour before Red Dragon would. So in regards to the site, there is a certificate of zoning use for a church, which was approved in July 2017. When we do a change in use, in this case from a church and assembly use to a restaurant, there is no change in parking requirements. The reason for this is because if we had to modify parking for the site each time that the use changes, if a use with more intensive parking requirements comes along, you may have to tear down part of the structure or the existing fabric of the space. And this allows buildings to stay and remain in their historical location, and parking can be made up elsewhere. I know there were concerns from one of our planning commission members in regards to handicap parking. There's a handicap parking spot directly in front of the space with the concrete ramp that leads down to Princess Anne, and there's also 2 additional spaces, one I believe in front of Red Dragon and one just a block away. There are 5 conditions that would affect the special use permit. They have to conduct it within 24 months of getting approval. It's limited to the hours of service that we've got here, which are more than what the applicant has recommended to give them flexibility. And it goes with cork and table. They're not considered a nuisance. Staff recommends approval, and the applicant's here this evening if you have any questions.
All right, commissioners, questions for staff? Mr. Bates.
Yes, I wanted to ask about the parking. First of all, I didn't quite realize that this code section that is cited in the staff memo applied across the board to all properties in the city, where it says changes in use shall be exempted from the requirement to provide additional on-site parking spaces beyond those that existed prior to the change in use. That seems like an awfully big exception across the board throughout the city, that if you go from, an office building to, I don't know, apartments or something that would require a lot more parking, that you never have to provide any more parking under any circumstances?
If you build new, you have to provide parking. But this provision was adopted or modified in 2009, maybe existed in a different form before then. And it was done in order to potentially permit the reuse of historical buildings like what you've got before you all tonight.
I thought it only applied downtown, but the downtown part's just the parking fund, I guess.
Yeah, in the actual historic district, yeah, that CD zoning district, that's a historic building credit, but this is changing use.
I don't know, I think this is something that we might want to revisit, because it just so happens in this case that there is generally parking available on the street, that it's not a problem. But what if there were no parking around here at all? Then what?
Right, and if it's a piece of property that's zoned correctly for the use, which is an issue, that's one thing to check. And, if it's a building that's got a set number of parking units, you can reuse it. So there's perceived negatives, but there's positives too about adaptive reuse and permitting the use of our older structures without changing the fabric. And that's something that we really do want to show you diagrammatically how the policy works. And if we'll go back to the computer, I'll just give you just some idea of what we're talking about. Maybe if the map's big enough, and it's really not, but look over here. Here you have a modern building and parking arrangement. That's not what existed historically. It's modern zoning standards applied over our older fabric. And it leads to this environment. And I'm looking right here, if you can see my mouse, at the bottom middle of the screen.
Oh, down there, okay.
Yeah. So that's the modern parking arrangement requirement. And here we've got a set of buildings that were built in an era where the automobile wasn't prioritized like it is today under modern zoning codes, that are of value, and it's an area of town that's got a more tight-knit fabric where there's a comfort level for pedestrians that we may want to preserve, and the intent of this was to preserve it. And Mr. Rodriguez actually asked me about this section of code, and I sent you guys stuff on the downtown parking code because I misread his email, and I apologize to you for that, Renee. I should have I should have read it more closely and had more of a background on this. But again, the intent is to be able to reuse these older structures in our non-conforming areas of town, which there's a lot of them. But certainly open to the conversation in the future, because I think once we put all the cards on the table, we'll have a very productive conversation about what we want this place to be.
Well, I mean, again, this is beyond this application, but I think we should really go back and revisit that, because what you're saying is sometimes very true, that sometimes it doesn't matter at all if you go from a use that required 4 parking spaces to one that required 12, and they're not readily available on site, there may be no problem. But I can certainly envision other circumstances where it really would be a problem. And in this case, it seems to me that it would make sense to add as a condition for this special use permit that the applicant must provide 14 off-site parking spaces at 1414 Caroline Street and at the Red Dragon lot while this use continues.
Those parking spaces are all allocated to another use, Mr. Pates.
Well, it says that that's where they're going to park.
They've got some availability lists. I'll let Mr. Fallon talk about what he's able to access there. It's my understanding it's a shared use situation, and but I'll let him speak to that.
Well, I think we should provide something for them to require, to provide some additional off-street parking.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Yeah, I share the similar concern, and I actually had thought about proposing to amend the agenda today to talk about that ordinance. I do think that we should add it to either, if it's not the next meeting, but one of those coming up, because I think it is an issue that we need to look at, and maybe it's not the intended purpose as we thought. And I think there's some city council folks, councilmen and women that are actually interested in that same topic. So if we can have that discussion, I'd love to, because like for me, trying to understand it, just getting the lay of the land of that area, on Hawk Street, it's resident only parking. So I like Red Dragon. I visit there a lot. I'll be honest, specifically on Saturdays for tacos. But now One More Taco is going to be downtown. But anyway, but I go there a lot. I like the place, but there's no parking. The only availability, if there's not a food vendor there, it's very hard to get into those parking spaces that are attached to the warehouse portion of the building next to it. And then the on-street parking, there's a couple handicap spots there, but they usually get taken up pretty quickly. And then for the on-street, if the person doesn't pull all the way forward because of the jut outs, you really only get one parking spot near the front of the building of the Red Dragon. But anyway, so there's just some parking challenges that make me concerned with that. But when I read the ordinance, so for its original purpose, I look at that was basically a complex before Creative Color bought the whole building, the investment part, right? The Rappahannock Goodwill had that entire operation where they did their things off of. So each piece has now been chopped up. So how do we determine what its original use was? Because as a complex, sure, they have plenty of parking. But now that it's a separate building, and we're saying, there was a church in there before, but I don't think that really gets to what the original use of the building under this code. That's why I would like to have that conversation offline. At another time to really investigate the code, because my interpretation of it is that we should be looking at what the original use of that building is and what that requirement for those parking spaces. Because I think that it should have come with some parking or some type of offset. When we do it for new structures, we just had another proposal where the gentleman is paying another, to use other facilities for his parking requirements. So I think it's something that could be done. And that area is filling up. Some people I've talked to in the community said, you can park at the community center. Well, what about the people that rent out the community center for private events? They're expecting to be able to use the limited parking that's there. There's residential parking, on Charles Street. So it just creates some more gluts of issues. But so I just wanted to bring that to attention and maybe ask that we can put that on the agenda at some point.
Okay.
That's just my perspective from the project, and I don't know that we should help create additional future problems if we can help make policies to, you know, and decisions to help prevent some of those things.
All right, Mr. Horny.
The restaurant's allowed by right currently, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
It's the alcohol sales that we're considering tonight?
Yes, sir.
So without alcohol, they could still,
Yep, he could open up tomorrow. You guys see you and
thank you.
applicable permits, yes, sir.
Any other comments, questions? Okay. Hearing none. At this particular point in time, we'll open up the public hearing on this topic. Applicant available to talk to it? Yes, sir. Please state your name and your address.
Excuse me. My name is James Fallon. I live at 420 Greenbrier Court in Fredericksburg.
Okay. Questions for the applicant?
Yes.
Mr. Page?
Yeah, I just want to go back to this parking issue here. Can you explain a little bit more what they're talking about here in the staff report about you all planning to use the lot at 1414 Caroline Street?
So in the negotiations that went on for the lease, it was agreed that during the evening hours after 5 p.m. that we would have use, the Cork and Table restaurant would have use of the parking lot, which Creative Color uses from 9 to 5, which is on Caroline Street, around the corner from the restaurant. At present, the parking lot adjacent to all three buildings, the Red Dragon, the Creative Color, and Cork and Table, has been reserved for Red Dragon during the evenings.
So all of these properties are owned by the same people? Creative Colors owns the whole thing?
Correct.
I see. Well, do you think that there would be any problem if this were just included as a condition, that your parking would that you would be able to provide these 14 spaces in that lot?
It wouldn't be a problem for me, but in other situations, I couldn't guess.
Well, it would, I suppose it would mean that if you quit operating Cork and Table, you know, next year and sold it, that whoever bought it would still need to provide those same parking spaces.
They are in the lease, so.
Yeah, if they're in the lease. In fact, I think we could word a condition such that the existing lease would satisfy the condition.
Yeah.
That would be fine. The reason I ask about this is that alternative parking arrangements in the past, and this is some ancient history, where we've had uses in the city like office buildings, apartments, everything, where there was no parking available on site, and we used to require that when that was the case and that people couldn't meet the parking requirements, that they could provide alternative off-site parking, okay? And so they would do that, and then the next year it would all disappear. You know, and that's why I was interested in trying to get this locked into the special use permit.
Yeah, it's a long-term lease that you know, was one of the draws about this situation. I'm presently located at, you know, Caroline Street between William and George, which is probably one of the most challenging parking locations in the city. And,
I'm sure it is.
So the opportunity to, you know, have dedicated parking was one of the draws to moving to this location. And I would like to note something just parenthetically, that in the period since the application for the special use permit was entered, it came to pass that one of my customers is a neighbor of the of the future property. She's at 1400 Princess Anne across the street, and she has offered more spots for the evening. She has 6 right across the street. So, you know, that one thing to note is, you know, I'm fortunate in that I have an established customer base here, having been here for quite a few years, and have that opportunity and how to create that in a similar situation would be a question, but, you know, I think it is I would guess that for the city to maximize their situation, things like that would be helpful. You know, restaurants would use it after the businesses are closed, and you
Well,
know,
and
that's an
I think if,
efficient way of handling things.
right, and I think if some sort of parking arrangements are provided for when a business like this opens, then that will help the business, it'll help the neighborhood, it'll help the city. I've heard people commenting, I live nearby, and are very excited about the idea of you expanding and moving there. So we certainly want to encourage that, but I think we ought to try to make some parking arrangement. Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Is this all going to be self-parking? Is that the plan? You're just going to advertise it on your website and say parking is available here, here, and here? And then,
Very good question. I do have to work that out. I think it may behoove, in this circumstance, to place a sign at the door, and obviously mentioning on the website, and then potentially, you know, discussing with these individuals who are making arrangement to allow our use of their parking lots in the evening, potentially a sign on site saying this parking lot is available to cork and table customers in the evening. Those are things I've thought about. You know, we're about 8 months from opening, so
have you considered valet?
it's still a process. I've considered valet, but I've never done that before, so I would have to see, first of all, what the potential liability issues would be involved with that. I'm not really familiar with that end of things. You know, how Fredericksburg, one question I have is how Fredericksburg would respond to a valet. And obviously, there would be increased costs, either from, you know, the prices at the restaurant or by charging for valet. But it is something I've considered, especially since we seem to be creating this satellite lot thing. I would probably surmise it would be a Friday, Saturday night thing, the valet. I don't imagine that we will be doing the sort of business which would merit. And I don't know that the parking demands would be as great during the weekdays. So. Something to consider, I believe,
All right.
yes.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Is there a pass-through between the building to you, or do you have to literally go down Hawk and
That's a
then?
good question, yeah.
Okay,
At present, it looks like the customers will have to go around.
okay, thank you.
From what John Van Hoy, the owner of Creative Color, has stated, it's impassable between the back of the restaurant. The other thing is the back of the restaurant is, you know, not very attractive. It's not
Okay, thank you, sir.
probably, yeah.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, sir. Anyone else to speak on this topic during the public hearing? Hearing none, seeing none. Public hearing is closed. All right, commissioners.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the special use permit with the conditions outlined on page 2 of the staff memo, plus one additional condition, which would state essentially that the applicant shall provide at least 14 off-site parking spaces at 1414 Caroline Street and at the Red Dragon lot next door, daytime hours only, so long as the use is continued, and that if there's a need to change the location for this off-site parking, it could be done with the review and approval of the zoning administrator.
I'll second
Mr.
that.
Craig,
Can I make one comment? I reread Mr. Fallon's application, and he's got those parking spaces available in the evening hours. And we've been through a lot of these type of situations. There's some risk that without stating that you're requesting the spaces be available in the evening only, that future zoning administrator wouldn't permit them to open other than in the evening when they're available. If you don't have an issue with them being open for lunch and creative color parking there, I just ask you specify that so that it's clear that we're only requesting that we know that they have the evening parking available, that they can open for the lunch if they need to, that kind of thing. That specificity does matter.
But,
So,
but,
for what
but
it's
the
worth.
daytime parking would be provided at the Red Dragon.
Okay. Is
That was what was stated in the application.
Well, there's Saturday hours and, well, I don't know.
I don't know if that's a
what it's worth.
problem or not, but.
I think just having them with the 14 spots, because if he, even if he made the arrangement across the street for 6 of them, that's closer than behind the alley, or,
Well, that would be fine with me if we just simply limited it to the 14.
Do we need to specify where they are? Can we give him the ability to say, are we?
Well, they're already in the lease.
Right.
And so that's why I was thinking the lease could just satisfy the condition, but it would be subject to possible change or amendment in the future with the approval of zoning administrator.
These things get real finicky on the details, and that's my hesitancy here.
What's your proposed language?
In his document, if I read it again, what he's saying is that he has the ability to use 15 spaces clearly in the evening that are behind the building. I would go with that. The Red Dragon has hours that vary, and they use that lot, and I didn't feel real clear about that. So I don't want there to be conflict between the uses, and then a future James not remember this conversation and say, okay, Cork and Table, you're shut down in the daytime. Because we do that. I mean, that's how we handle these things if people don't provide that parking.
And there's a stipulation here that says in the daytime, they're mostly for the use of employees. So
And
we are
it's-
expanding it.
It's kind of, I feel a little weird about that.
yeah, you don't want to limit, because if they end up finding a lunch business, even though they've already said they're evening predominantly.
It would satisfy my intent in the motion that if we just take care of the evening parking where he said it's going to be, as provided in the lease, but subject to some adjustment in the future if that's not available.
Is that the motion?
Yeah, that's a motion.
I'll second it.
All right, we're open for discussion.
So staff, you're convinced that language would not preclude the proprietor to open for lunch if he decided at some future point that he wanted to?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Spates?
I think this is a good project. This is a building that has been vacant for some time. For those of you who are old Fred, it was interesting in our discussion the other night. I loved that with the branding people. And there were 35 people, I guess, in the room, and they wanted a show of hands of how many people on our boards and commissions are new to Fredericksburg or weren't born here. And everybody in the room raised their head except me and 2 others, I think. And it made
One
me
being his
realize
wife.
I'm really outnumbered these days in terms of Old Fred. But if you're from Old Fred, you remember that it was Garrett TV many years ago in the 60s and 50s. And I remember it was they sold TVs and repaired TVs there, but it hadn't done much since then. So I think it's a great addition to that corridor, just the kind of project that we're hoping will be successful there and improve the whole corridor. So I certainly wish you luck, and I think it's a good project.
Anything else, Mr. Rodriguez?
I just wanted to echo that as well. One of my big things is parking and access and accessibility, and I think having that detail of knowing that it's in your lease that's available and us putting it in this, I think I feel really comfortable about that. Welcome you to the neighborhood. I expect to come over a few times.
I gotta try these tacos. Anything else?
Yeah, I would just would like to compliment the applicant for, Mr. Fallon, for being a pioneer in, along with Red Dragon and other businesses, in starting to change the character of that section of Princess Anne, something that the city clearly wants to happen, for development to continue along Princess Anne in our CT and our CH zones along Princess Anne. And so I think this is a great project, and I also look forward to having a meal or two there.
All right? No more
Except I'll be
discussion?
walking.
No more discussion? Cast your ballots, please. Motion carries 6-0.
We're unanimous tonight.
Okay. That concludes the two items for hearing. So we're moving on to other business, and we're at item number 7A, and that is the annual report. And we kind of had some good conversation during the work session. I know that Mr. Johnston mentioned about process, some things we need to talk about there. So, do you want to start, Mr. Johnston, on the matters that you had, and we'll kind of chime in?
Let me suggest, Mr. Chairman, that these things have gotten somewhat merged together. Let me suggest that you focus on either the CIP or the annual report first at your choice. And let's do one first and then the other.
Okay, so I think the annual report is kind of, to me, it should be quick,
All right?
but I don't know.
Let's do that.
Okay? So, and the only reason I say that is because we've had the annual report since November 27th. I don't believe that Mr. Craig has received, many comments, which means, the document is standing. Guess we're about 2 weeks, week and a half, that I provided the cover letter. I did get comments back from Mr. Durham. I don't know if anybody else has anything significant. I know, Mr. Pates, we talked about it this evening, especially you focused on the difference between the annual report and the CIP. I think we've come to an agreement and an understanding. They are two separate documents for two separate purposes. And the three recommendations that I placed into the cover letter were aimed at really getting us to a point where, given all of the governing documents, excuse me, that we have, meaning the 2015 comp plan, along with the Annex B, which has all those action items in it, then moving to the 2016, here comes a new vision statement, along with 8 desired future states. Following that, in 2017, we have 35 priorities, just trying to, number one, look at how we crosswalk those, and we're going to work on that, Mr. Pates. Like you said, we can do that ourselves. But then there's a measurement factor, because with the priorities, there's measurements and percentages, and now that they've basically moved that into the comp plan, we do need to determine what does that whole aspect look like, because for the old Annex B, we only had ongoing, immediate. So what did that mean as far as accomplishing those action items? And so how do we merge all of that? And then finally, the final piece to that was the third piece, just a couple sessions, work type sessions with city council, just to make sure that, number one, we have the intent as we go into the process of the year, and then probably a check kind of midway. Not that it has anything to do with what we do for the annual report, but just to make sure we're all on the same page as we go through the year. So that's kind of it for the annual report. So I guess the question for the commission is, do you need this week, next week to finish looking at what we have? Are we, like I said, I already have Mr. Durham's comments. What would you like to do
Mr. Chairman,
at this point?
Mr. Chairman, let me try to restate what you just said from a different perspective. I think you're trying to be extraordinarily comprehensive, and that's a good thing. But I think it's to the detriment of being able to focus on what the intent and purpose of the annual report is versus the CIP and the comprehensive plan. The annual report, from my perspective, as I read the state code and understand its intent, is more focused on what we planners call current planning. What's happening now? What happened in the past year? Where are we in terms of just sort of general actions that have occurred in the recent past? Let me suggest that be the focus of your cover letter for the annual report. I think the review of the CIP gets into the larger issues of conformance with the comprehensive plan in terms of overall policies, the long-term vision, long-term activities. I think it'd be helpful for the benefit of the council, perhaps to sort of maybe split your focus and your thought in that manner and say, in the past year, all these events occurred. In general, these we believe are generally consistent with the comprehensive plan. These are the issues we see coming up based on what we saw in the past year. And an example of that happened this evening. We had the discussion about parking. We believe that based on recent experience, parking may be an issue, whether it's in downtown or in a new maker district or wherever that might be. But I would not, I would urge you not to get too far into the annual report when you're talking about overall goals and priorities. That can be through the CIP process and through your discussions directly with council. Mr. Chairman, I will say I think you wrote an excellent letter, and I'm not just saying that. I'm just trying to make you feel good, but I really do think you wrote an excellent letter that I think does encompass the issues and talks about where things are from the current sense. So I just give you that
Okay, I appreciate that.
positive feedback.
I thought it was terrible.
I was trying to follow your lead. I just want you to know that.
No, I'm just kidding. I'll be candid. I did not have a whole lot of time to look at it. I'm willing to support what you've written. I just scanned it real quickly. If we have time, I can offer some, I can review it a little bit more thoroughly, but I don't want to hold up the show. So I'm willing to proceed, but if others have comments or want more time, I'm be
What was
happy
our
to get it.
deadline for the letter? Was
Pardon
it April, or am
No.
I getting our
No,
dates mixed?
the annual report, 1 December.
Oh, right.
But let me just say this.
Of last year.
So last year, I was just about to say, so last year we got it in 9 February, and the year before it was like 29 January. So we haven't made 1 December. So I would say we have time.
Mr. Chairman.
If folks want to take a little bit more of a look.
My recommendation is that you take any feedback that you've received to date, that you send out an updated version to everybody. You give everybody a deadline by, let's say, the end of next week or something like that, and then let's transmit it. I really don't think we need to continue to have a tremendous amount of conversation with this. I think the letter is great. I provided some feedback, but mine, a lot of that is just happy to glad, trying to help you to make it as as perfect a document as it can be. I think it's ready to go.
I like that idea.
I like that idea too, that we plan to approve it at our next meeting, which is what date is that?
But we don't have to approve the letter, do we?
Oh, I thought you were talking about sending out a new version and getting comments back.
He's going to wait for any additional comments with the deadline and then incorporate those in as he sees fit.
Just forward it on.
That's fine, that's fine.
I don't want to wait.
I think we did that last year as well.
Right. And
Mr. Pates, I just don't think we need to wait until the next scheduled meeting. I think this can be done in short order.
Yeah.
We've seen the initial draft. we've all had a chance to look at it. Some have provided, some have been able to do it a little more than others. That's fine. It's understandable. My recommendation is incorporate the changes that have been recommended, and that makes sense. Submit it to the full commission for a final review with a short turnaround time, and then
So you'll send that out?
the
Yep, I can do it
chairperson,
when I leave here this evening. 'Cause I
the
already
chairman
got it in
just
an email.
just
'Cause
submit
I
it.
have a few things I would
Yep.
suggest.
Okay.
That sounds good.
All right. Okay, so we've taken care of the annual report. We're good there. So moving on to the CIP.
The process going forward on the CIP, present tense,
Okay.
right now. We as staff are not prepared, and when I say we as staff, I'm including Ms. Jett as well as planning staff, are not prepared really to provide you with any more comment or information until we receive the city manager's budget, which would be distributed to you all on the 13th. We have talked, I believe, about the idea of having your second meeting on March 25th in the form of a public hearing on that comprehensive plan, for you to hear from the public and for you all to come to some consensus as what statements you wanted to move forward with when you assemble in order to forward them to the city council. City council's public hearing, as Ms. Jett said, is the third Tuesday in April. I would urge you either, after you have had a chance to absorb what on March 13th, what the comprehensive plan says, and then, I'm sorry, what the CIP says, and then have after your meeting on the 27th to make your opinions known. It can be held over to your April 10th meeting, but that is immediately before the April 16th council public hearing and is cutting it very close. And as I recall, that's what happened last year. We got cut up very close. So any additional discussions you all wish to have to understand in your mind the difference between council priorities versus the Appendix B versus, that's fine. I mean, that's good to help pull those things together. When the council established their priorities, I mean, I did inquire with the city manager, should we be amending our comprehensive plan? And his sense is that the council priorities are sort of above the comprehensive plan, that the council priorities are providing guidance to how the comprehensive plan moves forward. Now, in 2020, we are supposed to be starting the process of the 5-year update to the comprehensive plan. It's supposed to be reviewed every 5 years. We will probably be starting that process probably towards the end of this year to try to meet that goal. And I think it's through that process that we will try to amalgamate these council priorities, the comprehensive plan priorities in this Appendix B. So we're happy as staff to help you all facilitate an understanding of the various policies and plans and issues, but we are not in a position to provide you any more information about the CIP until we get the manager's budget. Part of this process, once we finish this process, this present tense process, I think we really need to look at the commission bylaws, because I think that they are not in sync with the way the council and the city manager have set out the budget process. For example, the October meeting is just premature in terms of the general process. It's perfectly appropriate, however, for the planning department to come forward and say, these are the topics that we as planning are thinking would be appropriate to go into the CIP. And so, but that would only deal with issues such as money for the area plan, money for the stormwater water quality proposals that are going forward, historic resources grants, et cetera. And I think that's an ideal time to talk about it, just from the planning standpoint. But it is not a good time to talk about sort of general city CIP activities because those are handled by the different departments. And so we need to sit down and talk through with you all how you want to handle this, and we need to understand that the city manager and the city council have set out their process, and I think we need to be over to that.
I think we have to first understand, what is the purpose of the planning commission's review of the proposed CIP? What's the purpose of it?
Well, the state code reference, which I think is in one of the opening documents, one of the documents that I saw cited in Mr. Gantz's letter, very effectively summarizes the state code section. The state code section is written from the presumption that the planning commission is involved with the development of the CIP. I will tell you the reality here in the city of Fredericksburg is that it's developed by the city manager's office in conjunction with direction from city council.
Right.
And so I think planning commission
Right.
review is appropriate, but I don't think the commission can see itself as the author of the CIP.
No, hardly. So what I would expect is just like any of these budget processes, you have a list of desired, but you have budget realities, right? So the city manager has to make has to go through a process to determine a one to N list and make a cut somewhere, right? I believe that the purpose of the Planning Commission's review of that product is to evaluate the degree to which the city manager's work is meets the intent of the comp plan. So, but these are all things that we all understand. Budget decisions are budget decisions, and so you say you have a comp plan. This is what we aspire to, and so the proposed budget means that you're going to only, reach some level of compliance or not, maybe not, that's not the right word, but meet the goals espoused be consistent with the comp plan. So that's why it's important that we have sufficient time and sufficient support from planning staff to do that specific analysis. Now, I know that puts you in a really tough position because essentially you are helping us to critique your boss's work. And I see that that's a real problem. But it does appear that state code indicates that that's what this body is supposed to do, and advising city council on essentially how has the city manager done to be in compliance or in conformance with the comp plan.
Mr. Durham, you're making a lot of good points, and we're all thinking along the same lines. There's no moral judgment here about the city manager, but what we did try to do in this annual report, I just want to make sure I point this out to you guys a few times whenever I get the opportunity. We've listed the transportation improvements and their potential funding sources in the annual report and whether or not they're funded. We've listed the capital improvements that appear in the comprehensive plan and where they appear in the budget. I'm happy to go through that with you guys if you want to call up or something like that. The reason for doing that was to help do exactly what you're saying, to give you all the grounding, then to kind of think about, well, what is in our plan and what is proposed in the budget, and help kind of close the gap.
I mean, ultimately, I think what our report on the proposed CIP should have some basic understand, or provide city council with a scorecard essentially on how we're doing, how the budget that's being proposed will support or not support the comprehensive plan. And it's up to them. It's a political decision on how they want to, where they want to go from there.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Pace.
But that's, in some ways, that's not really very realistic, because, I mean, I think you could probably say that everything in the city manager's proposed CIP supports the comprehensive plan. I mean, what seems to me is a more useful exercise for the Planning Commission is to look at the action items that were in the comp plan as amended or whatever, and see how well we're doing in terms of prioritization of these projects. Because as you recall, they were originally listed as, immediate action or
Ongoing.
within the near future or someday. And that's where these priorities change over time, and where I think we can provide some useful input to council and say, well, here's a project that's an immediate item that nothing's been done, and so we think it's still important, and therefore we would suggest that you put this in there in some fashion. Or there are others that are in there that we say, well, that's outdated, and we can ignore that. I think that's the kind of input that we may be in a position to provide. We don't do a budget, and they got all kinds of other problems in picking and choosing, but I think we can be very helpful in that, to that degree.
So, Mr. Johnson, I guess I understand what you're saying, and, it's kind of like, I'm thinking to myself, I opened Pandora's box here, as I tried to pull all this together. Can I just ask a question? For the 35 priorities, which, according to the vision and what was written, and even in the annual report, they only have a period of 17, 18, 19. So I guess my question to you would be, what happens to anything that is not 100% at the end of this FY19 out of the 35 priorities? Because they do say they're only for 17, 18, 19. So what happens to them after that?
Well, they do get updated every 2 years. I mean, that's my understanding, that's the city manager's goal. And so what was adopted roughly 2.5 years ago, or 2 years ago, I guess, they started 2.5 years ago, has been updated, is in the process of being updated, and actually is going to be a subject of at a council work session at their February 12th meeting. I will pause to sort of interrupt myself and say that we're going to do a better effort of getting the city council work session items on your calendar so you can see what they're doing and what they're saying, and if you choose to attend and able to attend, that'd be great. We're going to make a real commitment to try to get that so that you're more understanding of what's going on. But so they are changing that. They update and revise it. There's been a couple new ones added and some reworking and reassessment, and so they will evolve over time, which creates a little bit of a challenge because the comprehensive plan is sort of thought of as a policy that sort of remains. It's the maybe not 10 commandments, but it's it's the 47 sub-commandments, whatever. But these council policies will change and evolve, particularly as there's changes of council membership. So we will have to look at how we can be more flexible in the comprehensive plan, and perhaps that means the comprehensive plan sections itself get amended every couple of years.
So, because Ms. Jett, she spoke this evening, and one of the things that she highlighted is that there are more requirements than resources. So when you start looking at the priorities, and I guess this is where I'm trying to come in, when you start talking about what does the planning commission do to help advise city council about where the CIP and the comp plan are, who's setting, like, you got 1 to 35. Who says what's number one when you start talking about resources? And I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out right now in my own head. So I got 35 priorities that I'm trying to work, and they go across these 8 desired future states, okay? And as of October of last year, you have a report that shows each one of where they are. So if I'm looking at it and I'm only, and I keep going to small area plans because, we've been working that a lot, but it says 25%, okay? Do I start putting more funding there to move that in a particular direction, or do I go to one of the other areas and start doing something with that, given the fact that I have finite funds?
As I understand, the intent of the city manager is that these are not sequential, that they are all simultaneous, that we are supposed to be fighting the battle on 35 fronts. And some of them will take longer to achieve than others, simply because it just some are bigger objectives, if you will, bigger hills to climb up. And so I think the idea is that we don't just do one or two at a time and then tick them and knock them off the list, is that we proceed with all 35 of them.
Yeah, but Mr. Hornick, go ahead, because
It's a little bit of deja vu. I think we had the same conversation the last couple of years about how are we commenting on the CIP? Because jurisdictions that have grown in population have sort of ceded most of the planning commission's review responsibility of this CIP to staff, to professional staff. I mean, we're not going to comment on the school budget, and we think there should be more funding for school buses this year, whatever it might be. We have professional staff whose job it is to do that. So I think what I recall we did last year is we focused on those priorities. We focused on planning initiatives that we wanted to see and make sure were prioritized. Things like continuing to fund the small area plans at an accelerated rate, which at one time, I think 2 years ago, was still on a more drawn-out schedule, and City Council wanted to speed those up. And then to try to look at those priorities and make recommendations for future CIPs, maybe not for the coming fiscal year, but what we saw as priorities, such as the parking and other things that we would like to see get more inclusion in future years, because they didn't fall within the available funding for the current year, or maybe it wasn't even an initiative at that point that was being pursued, but was one that we felt should be a priority with the goals and vision that was in the comp plan and in the vision statement. Things like, I think at one point we talked about improvements to the train station, which was not on anybody's long-range CIP, that we said, we get it, there's no money for it, but we really think this is a priority that we need to start talking about. Let's talk about how do we get this on a future CIP. Really, I think that's where the wheelhouse we need to be within. I'm not able to comment on the schedule of, fire truck replacement. It's not so I think that's where I think we should focus. I think that's where we tried to narrow it in the last couple of years. And I think it makes it a much more manageable process for us to say, as a body and as a body in charge of looking towards the future growth and planning of this community, what are those elements that we need and the city needs to fulfill that vision. And if you read that vision statement, not a lot of it ties to school buses or to, those are all managing the assets of the community and providing services. It's not the vision planning that I think we're tasked with.
But that was only because the vision is about the 8 desired future states. The 35 priorities, actually, if you go read, the school buses are in there somewhere out of the 35 priorities. And I guess to go to what you just stated, at least for me, okay, and you use small area plans. So if we take the small area plans, which you had in yours and Mr. Pates had in his, how are we measuring that? Because my question to you, if you read what's in the annual plan right now, we held a series of meetings, quite a few of them, and we had a company come in and do some things for us. But the question still becomes, if you're on a timeline and you have funding that you got to put towards something, where are we at with that?
Well, I believe the funding of the future phases of the annual plan are in the CIP. They're listed. So we don't need to repeat that again this year. It's in there. But those are CIP items for future years, for next year and the following.
I think what Mr. Horning is saying is that we ought to take a look at this in a big picture viewpoint as opposed to a budget green eye shade line by line, and I agree with that. I think we ought to be looking at it from a big picture standpoint, as essentially, does the city manager's proposed capital improvement plan, to what degree does it support the principles that are espoused in the comprehensive plan? And we don't have to do that by nitpicking whether a specific line item is 1 million or 1.1 million, but we can take a look and see whether something has been completely left off the table. And it's not a value judgment. It is simply pointing things out to city council so that our body is saying, we understand that there's a need to make budget decisions. Resources aren't available to do everything that people want to do. We just want you to be aware that because of the way the budget process has gone and the decisions that were made, you will fall short in this particular area because something wasn't done. And so if we have a kind of a big picture a view of this, I think we'll have a successful product.
I'm in agreement, so I don't want to get to a point where we think we're being nitpicked. See, to me, here's a statement, okay? Employment epicenter, in compliance with the comp plan, done, we're moving on. I'm just that simplistic, okay? You know, and that just goes to, hey, there's something in the CIP that they're addressing that goes to however they want to do employment epicenter. They're doing something. So that says it's in compliance with the comp plan. Move on.
But one example on that in Employment Epicenter, and you look at the proposal for the VA clinic and the road improvements that go with that. To Mr. Rodriguez's point earlier, you know, do the road improvements that are associated with that show up in the CIP? You know, that is an actual CIP planning item that in approving that zoning, I think the city kind of said, we're committed, if this moves forward, to seeing that happen. So I think it's within our area of review to say, okay, we've done this. Do we have a plan for it? Is it in there? And I assume it will be. It may be in out years. It may be through some sharing of funding or whatever it might be. But I think that's a planning area where it is directly tied to our role in reviewing zoning approvals and in seeing the city develop as that employment epicenter. So that's one where.
I guess I'm just trying to keep this simple, okay? That's all I'm trying to figure out. How do we keep it so that it is beneficial and at what we're doing? Mr. Rodriguez, you want to say something?
Well, I think that, I don't know, part of it, talking about the dollars, I think is important, though. You know, with that example, because we saw, like, fluctuate from 27 to 14 for the gateway improvement. But one other issue that comes to my mind is the school, for example, because in last year's capital improvement plan, it was in the 5-year plan. This year, it's forecasted as XX. Now, she did mention, Ms. Jett, that there's been a lot of conversation, and the school board and the city council have had a lot of, you know, come to, you know, we've got to figure out a more tenable solution for our schools because of the lack of classroom space. So I know that they're looking at something, but there used to be that wedge that was in the 5-year, and then it got bumped. You know, so it's like those kind of comments. I do think that we should, from a development perspective, and goes hand in hand with what we're trying to do as planning commissioners, where we would make a comment to say that does need to be pulled forward, or if it's not adequately funded, you know, I mean, we have to do that working with staff or, you know, to figure out what that number is, because not all of us are in that line of business. But, you know, I think that is something that there are some times where we will need to err on the financial piece of it.
But I don't know if that is beneficial according to what Mr. Johnson said, Mr. Hornick has said, only because of the fact, and I'll just give you an example here. So here's a great example. So the desired future state is learning is a way of life, okay? That's the desired future state, all right? Which, to me, that's where we would start, because that's what we're going to determine, is it compliant with the comp plan? So that's the topical. But then you have a place in here where it says, and here you go. I just looked at it, had to do with schools. Okay, so priority number 9, establish a memorandum of understanding that results in a plan for future growth and alignment of schools for the next 10 years. So if indeed in the comprehensive plan right now, they have funding over the years that go to schooling, guess what? They're in compliance. I mean, because that's what they say they're gonna do. I mean, I'm just, you know, how much they're spending, that's a whole different discussion, which I don't believe is in our purview at this point in time. I don't know.
This discussion is interesting, but can go on for some period of time but without resolution, in part because the comprehensive plan, its existing policies, did not attempt to prioritize them, and there was a resistance from council to prioritize them because they wanted to keep their options open. Let me suggest that, Mr. Chairman, you and Mr. Craig and I sit down and talk this through some more, see if we can come up with a strategy of how to move forward and how to begin to figure out how to prioritize these items and work it through. Let me suggest that maybe the three of us talk some more on that.
So, just to close this out, what we're about to do for the CIP going forward is for 20.
Correct.
Because we didn't do anything for 19.
We are not, because that
Right.
budget sailed a year
So
ago.
technically,
And we did that last year.
we have no CIP letter.
There was some comments last year.
Yeah, but we don't have one going forward right now because we separated.
Right, and it's not appropriate for you to have one until after you receive the CIP on March 13th, to have your public hearing on March 25th.
Last year, we were so late, we could combine the two, I think. Isn't that what happened? We were so late in our annual report that the timing worked out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, moving on. 7B, Planning Commissioner comments. It has Housing Advisory Committee. We haven't had a meeting, or I missed a meeting.
No, there's going to be a meeting set up in February. Suzanne will be in touch with everyone. First, sort of associated with this, though, I think it's appropriate that I very briefly go through a PowerPoint presentation that the Virginia Organizing Group gave to City Council last night regarding affordable housing. They talked about who they were, the importance of affordable housing. There's a series of slides about demographics, how they think the issue ought to be addressed. They talked about who they were and their goals. They talk about some of the financial issues. We'll email this PowerPoint to you guys so you can read it without having to absorb it all tonight. But they kind of went through a numerical evaluation of what that meant. And they're talking about this is not housing for poor people per se. This is housing for folks who are working but just don't quite have sufficient funds. They broke down the population and households that are challenged, median income, and Fredericksburg has a relatively high percentage of households that are challenged and a relatively low median income compared to the jurisdictions in our immediate planning district. Their response for addressing the issue is what they would call a housing trust, that either through a governmental entity or a non-governmental entity, that funds would be set up to help finance either redevelopment or rehabilitation of housing, or to provide housing with some degree of assistance, if you will. The models for trust funds are quite varied. It was pointed out that our CDBG funds, we often have to really beat the bushes to get them fully spent. And it's been 3 years since we have anyone come forward and seek assistance for the funds that are available for the purchase of housing. And we try to get the information out there. I think some of the issue as to why that hasn't happened, there is a little bit of paperwork involved, but it's not really that much more paperwork than a regular mortgage process. So we are looking at trying to figure out how to get that word out more clearly, and ask the Virginia Organizing Group to use their auspices to help get that information out. They're talking about their goals for this trust fund would be folks that have a certain level in median income, supporting renters and homeowners. Trying to click here through all this. Yes. So they've talked about the goals of whomever they could choose, and this is some of the options of how the monies could be used. No, this is the options of where the money could come from. Sorry. And you can read through those. So they want the city to move forward on affordable housing. I will say that there was a consensus at council that this was a worthwhile thing, that no one's opposed to it, and that we would work it through. The council at this point is wanting to try to achieve some sort of regional response. I'm not sure how productive that's going to be, given there's been not a lot of enthusiasm on a regional level. But as long as council feels that they really need to make that effort, we will be focusing on that. So that, for Virginia Organizing Group, we're encouraging actions to move forward. So we encouraged them, they were encouraged to attend the next Housing Advisory Committee meeting to sort of talk about all that. So just where we are.
What sort of questions did they get from council members?
I think council really didn't ask a lot of questions, they just made more comments. That they agreed with them as to the priorities, and that they agreed that, and to make them aware that the CDBG funds we now have available, that we need help in letting folks know that that money is available. We know there's needs out there, we just need folks to come forward and ask for it.
And Chuck, what sort of money are you talking about, that's CDBG money that's not being spent?
Well, we do manage to spend it, and if we don't spend it, it rolls over. It's like 200.
We've got a great program. We've got several different parts of the program that we always hit our goals on. Direct, let's see, emergency home repair, which is your roof collapses and we fix it. Architectural barriers, you become disabled, you need a ramp. We hit that all the time. We've got subrecipients, CVHC, FAHAS, the food bank, and there's another one that I'm forgetting, legal aid, that they do a certain amount of service in the community we pay. It's direct homeownership assistance, giving people help with the mortgage to purchase their own home, that we haven't had anyone in 3 years. And that it's a problem with advertising, it's a problem with getting people qualified as well.
So what sort of money, that was my question, what sort of money is sitting there available?
It's not sitting, we just spend it in the other two programs. We spend it for more emergency home repair or more architectural barriers.
Oh, so the money gets spent, it's just not on this one program?
You can use it, you define your program
I
up
see.
front and you try to hit your targets. And what we found is that target was not accurate, and we spend it to fix people's porches or roofs that
It's not
collapse.
huge amount.
Which department administers these three funds?
It's community development planning, which is Susanna Finn and
Okay.
myself.
So you guys, okay.
Yes, sir.
So just ongoing discussions about affordable housing. The other item that was at council, Mike, can you click on the other presentation? Changing subjects entirely, was about.
PowerPoint?
I'm sorry?
Okay.
It's not about, it was about historic resources. Thank you. A report was given as to where we are with the Historic Resources Advisory Group that was set up, working group that was set up roughly a year ago. It was looking at how the city code could be improved, what was necessary for a preservation plan update and for the preservation handbook. And they did a series of brainstorming activities. There was a joint meeting of the ARB and council back in February a year ago. Came up with general goals. Committee was set up. 2 members from council, 2 members of the ARB. Other folks you see on their list. The moderator / chairman is John Hennessy from the Park Service. He's done a very good job at focusing the group. They established a goal statement, created an integrated package of ordinances, plans, and the handbook to achieve the city's commitment towards preservation. They created a vision that preservation is a core value, community value. We kind of already say this in the comprehensive plan, but they're sort of re-emphasizing it. And secondly, that preservation is a dynamic philosophy for change, trying to emphasize that preservation is important for moving forward. I'll go on a sidebar here. As many of you have alluded to, you participated in the discussion regarding the branding process, the city's effort to sort of figure out how it can portray itself in a way that's positive from an economic development standpoint as well as from a community spirit standpoint. And many of you did participate in those discussions. The Pates were very generous, provided the consultant group breakfast one morning at their home, and that was very positively received by them. They were very impressed. But they made an interesting comment as part of the discussion that in general, that the responses they get from folks and the comments they get from folks, historic preservation, ooh, bad, controlling, negative. Authenticity, oh, that's cool, that's what we want. We want something authentic. Well, something authentic is historic, you know, that there's a link there. And I think that's a real challenge for us moving forward on the whole preservation movement, is to understand that if you want authenticity in your community, there is the preservation that's part and parcel of that. So they are thinking of some changes, going to be proposing changes to the UDO. Some drafts will be presented to the council probably in February to begin to initiate that eventually coming back to you all as the Planning Commission in terms of reviewing it, changing some standards, validity, administrative review of minor items. Many of these topics in general have already been discussed with the ARB, but there will be more discussions on that as it goes forward that clarify how certain elements are administered to try to create better consistency and appropriateness and determinations. There are changes to the code regarding reference to the Secretary of Interior standards. There is a state provision for exemptions for rehabilitating historic real estate. A lot of that program, when it was set up about 20 some odd years ago, the state had a lot of bells and whistles you had to meet. But over time, the state's taken a lot of those things away, but they remained in local ordinances because that's how they were originally enabled or originally enacted. We can go back and probably make these rehabilitated tax credits, not tax credit, it's relief from your property tax based on doing a certain kind of rehabilitation, tax exemption, that we can improve that. We're looking at updating the historic preservation plan, looking at elements to do a better job for that. And then updates to the Historic District Handbook. Something that's in the CIP proposed is $15,000 to match what's called a certified local government monies that is it's federal money administered by the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. They hand out modest amounts to help localities do things like this very thing, like the handbook. So we're looking at moving forward with that. So these amendments will be coming forward to the council, and the grant funding will be moving forward. The February 12th meeting, there will be a similar discussion of the archaeological working group and where their recommendations are running. So if you're interested in hearing about that, please come to the council meeting on February 12th. We'll be talking about archaeology. The other item that was discussed that you all are, I think, already pretty familiar with at the work session was regarding the downtown plan. We are expecting a first draft, if you will, from the Street Sense folks any day now almost. We have some draft concepts that we've already ran past you guys back in December. Nothing really new to report there. We're sort of shopping this information around to the Arts Commission and the Memorials Commission and, who else? EDA, Parks and Rec. So we're trying to get everybody aware of all this. The goal is, the goal is to, we hope to get a draft plan from the street sense folks in the next week or two. There'll be some tweaks to it, showing you all what this preliminary draft looks like. We hope at the February 12th meeting, so you have some sense about that. Going to council at their February 26th meeting, and then doing a public information meeting on March the 5th, back up at the Planters Bank, the old museum facility, so the general public can sort of see, well, this is where the draft, how it's evolved, and then presenting it to you all, Planning Commission and to council, to be transmitting it, if you will, for acceptance, not approval, but sort of said, here's the final draft of the plan that then staff would then work on for actual amendments to the comprehensive plan and further work sessions with you and the city council on how to amend the comprehensive plan as has been passed out tonight, and then eventual ordinances. So we will get that on your calendar of hopefully we will have something preliminary to talk to you about on February 12th, and then a public information session on March 5th. Sort of the general goal with that. Later in the evening, I'm looking at my list here. Later in the evening, council on consent agenda approved all the amendments to the creating form-based codes for applicable to Area 3 and eventually to other areas on highway commercial and the development standards. So that was approved. And I guess the last thing I'll talk about is just FYI, you all may have seen some of this information. There was smart scale VDOT analysis came forward, and a series of projects in the city were approved for funding. The timing for the funding does somewhat vary case by case. The project that received the highest scoring, but they all received the funding, so really the priorities are not quite of issue, but just to sort of show how these things play out in their system. The top scoring project is transit related, which was some significant transit stop, bench transit shelter kind of improvements. That scored top in the area. The second highest scoring project is the double roundabout that's being proposed down at where Lafayette intersects Kenmore and Lafayette and Kenmore and Lafayette and Charles, that double roundabout. So that received the second highest. Third highest was intersection at Lansdowne and Route 2 Dixon at the south end of the city. The next highest was close to Mr. Pates' neighborhood here, Fall Hill and Route 1. And then lastly was just made in by the skin of its teeth is in trying to deal with congestion on Route 3. Mr. Pates asked earlier where we were with the whole gateway issue. The Commonwealth Transportation Board thought that was a worthy project if the VA clinic does decide to come there. And we're still in that if stage of the process. So I understand they set aside funding so that if that does happen, we would get monies to work towards building the extension of Gateway. But it's all dependent on if the final decision is made for the clinic. So that's still out there, dependent on the larger decision being made. At our February 13th meeting, Marnie will be coming to you with some sign code amendments, relatively minor tweaks based on some issues that have come up, and then we'll have at least one subdivision proposal coming to you guys. Valley Run? Or Highlander. Highlander, the townhouse project off of Lafayette.
That would disappear.
Yes, the across from the National Park Visitor Center, and then Valley Run will be coming up maybe the following meeting. Maybe March?
Valley Run's already been approved.
Oh, what?
That was approved.
I thought we did Highlander.
What was the other, there's another subdivision.
Yeah, we did Highlander last year.
Riverview, that's it. Sorry, Valley Run, Riverview, I was getting, the Riverview project, on Sophia, that's the other subdivision that's coming for you guys. Oh, boy. But that will probably be March.
What's the project on Lafayette across from Lee's?
Telegraph,
Telegraph Hill?
Telegraph Hill.
Yeah, the Telegraph Hill single-family subdivision has already been approved, that's been through you guys. The Fredericksburg Park townhouse portion of that is still going through a technical review with staff. That may be coming in March or May, or March or April. That's coming, it's not as quite as immediate, but that is coming along.
That's been coming for
Which
10
is
years.
207, I think, 204 townhouse
Take a new
lots.
owner. Yeah, this guy's serious.
Sorry to drag that out, Mr. Chairman, but that's just,
Really excited. I live on
what's been
Brandon.
happening.
I can't wait
All
till
right.
everything opens up.
If there's nothing else,
like Wolfgang.
that concludes the evening.